I want to give you a couple of other examples of what will happen. Because this is so broadly spread, once they start using either pheromone or sterile insects, they immediately become blind. The pheromone that they will apply in order to confuse the male's ability to find females is the same pheromone that's used in the trap. So they can't find the trap. And secondly, once you release a lot of sterile insects, you're involved in a huge problem of sorting the sterile moths from those that are wild. And these have historically been programs that are extremely vulnerable to the failures of implementation that are human and that are technical. And there's not a single sterile insect technique application that has not failed. Maybe multiple times. It had to be restarted, reinstituted, or the rearing had to be moved, or a new technique had to be applied. And finally, my example is again a medfly example. As I mentioned, the issue was quarantine. They wanted to move product out of California to countries that quarantine that don't have medfly. So implemented a program in Los Angeles. The whole of the LA basin is being covered with sterile insects. That's not an eradication program. That is a permanent program, basically a permanent program of suppression that in its implementation masks finding medflies. But it's adequate to satisfy trading partners that the products can be moved. And that's what would happen here if this was implemented. And that's why I say it's smoke and mirrors, because they know that's what's going to happen. Yeah. They know that that's what it's about. And they know that they cannot succeed in eradication. They really can't even succeed in good suppression over this large area with these techniques.
Let me follow this comment up with the fact that, I guess all of us read every day, some hear and some don't, but I'm sure it's not long enough, and I go pick up the quarantine areas wrong. So it's like pretty soon there's a quarantine area, there's another quarantine area, another quarantine. How do you see these quarantine areas ever dissipating or getting larger? So soon California itself, every county becomes a quarantine level. How does that fit in with this program that ultimately, is this going to end quarantine? Or is this, how does it
the way it informs them is they think the classification of this insect is a red bug.
Yeah,
and that's where pressure from within the state ought to be applied at the APHIS level. This is an APHIS problem. APHIS is not very good at developing and implementing policy. They're not policy experts, they're policy appliers. So they need to be convinced that they need to look at the policy that's involved here, not the implementation.
And you can flesh that out a bit more. Yes?
Yeah, Jim Carey. For perspective here, what's happening and what needs to be accelerated is a shift in paradigm. And so that you have, when I first got into this business, it's really a dichotomy. You have the academics that deal with the IPM, and you have the USDA and APHIS and so forth dealing with what they call area-wide management. And what's happening now, the trend, and this is just a recent book too of the movers and shakers and the SIT and the USDA and so forth, is that it's a trend away from eradication to area-wide IPM. And so you have these two paradigms that used to be a dichotomy, still are to an extent, where they're beginning to merge. So that rather than eradicating, you really have area-wide IPM where you have, and this is what Dr. Chambers was talking about, it's in the grower's hands where you have an agreement between a buyer and a seller that you have X number of traps out and you don't catch any, and therefore it's a low risk and you can ship. But it should be in their hands, and that's where things are moving. And that's where I believe the program should be focused.
If I can add something on if I can add something on the trade part. It's a kind of a double-edged sword. We can reclassify here domestically and as long as Canada, Mexico, and other trading partners still quarantine against LBAM, we're still under their guns. So whatever USDA or APHIS has to work out with those trading partners, that has to be worked out. If you remember from the meeting we had in your office with the USDA, they had no interest in taking that line of discussion. And they told us, "Oh, good luck at changing the minds of trading partners." What I think is very important for this legislature to understand is two things. One is, in the package that I left for you, and the Citizens for Health package, you have a summary of our reclassification petition, and that talks about, the full petition talks about the quarantine issue. Canada adopted our trade restrictions against LBAM so they could access our market. Mexico likely did. When Mexico first issued their phytosanitary bulletin, they specifically said that we classify LBAM this way because we want access to your markets, but if you change your classification, we would consider changing ours. And if new science suggested that that classification should change, we would consider that. We got a similar communication from Canada, Ag officer in Canada saying the exact same thing. The only reason we quarantine for LBAM is because we have to satisfy trading partner quarantines, and the U.S. is our major trading partner. So if we didn't quarantine for LBAM, our access to the U.S. market would be threatened. So it's this revolving door quarantine policy that was initiated by USDA in 1984 in this country, and just became part of NAFTA, became part of trade between Mexico and Canada. Japan quarantines for everything. Most of Asia quarantines for most things. And we always get into these trade wars. This month, we want to ship broccoli, and next month we want to ship citrus, and next month apples. So we whack each other back and forth, and this is the basis of what's going on. Only USDA, as they told us, they don't have the time. They're so constantly busy putting out fires. They don't have the time to go after the trade aspects of the issue. And maybe there's help that can come from this legislature as who we would go to start trying to affect the trade part. And one last thing, that's another communication that is in our reclassification petition, is a communication from a trade representative, U.S. Trade Representative Richard Dunkel, to the trade representative of Mexico, acknowledging that LBAM was a superficial leaf roller, a transient pest, and that the current practices that we utilize in the U.S. for pest management are adequate to prevent LBAM transportation into other countries. They acknowledged that in 2007. Now that might have been them trying to satisfy Mexico trade representatives, but that was a statement that they put in writing to Mexico, that they acknowledged that this was nothing but a superficial and transient pest that was easily managed in agricultural systems, and that is where we have to go. If we maintain our classification, and if we don't take the issue to the floor of the trade representatives, this is going to be just like all the other eradication programs that CDFA has managed over the last 25 years. I've also given you in that package a list that was given to me by Secretary Carey of 274 eradication programs that they've managed since 1982. 274 for programs for 9 insects. Do you know what that means? That they've been eradicating the same 9 insects every year since 1982, and Secretary Kyle Moore is on the news claiming 100% efficacy in eradication. And they've been eradicating the same 9 pests for 26 years. These are not eradication programs, they're control programs, but I think predominantly for funding or for political, as Dr. Chambers mentioned, for political quarantine reasons.
And this would speak to the $3 million ad campaign that we are.
This is actually interesting. The reason they did that is last year, CDFA sponsored a scientific symposium on LBAM that luckily, I was graciously, they allowed me to attend. There was a director from New Zealand Ag who showed a commercial that they showed in New Zealand when they had an outbreak of some pest, and they sprayed their population with Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. And at first, their eradication program and the idea of aerial spraying was met with great opposition. And then they did this commercial that showed this little moth on a leaf very close up. And they talk about how this moth eats everything under the sun, just like we've been told about LBAM. And then as they back off, it shows that the leaf is eaten. And then that they back off further, the whole tree is decimated. And then they back off further, and it looks like Middle Earth was destroyed in the Hobbit land. Right? And they said, this is what's going to happen if you don't support our program. And that's what they've started with the Hungry Pest program. We're the light brown apple moth, we're the gypsy moth, we're in California, we're hungry. And Kyle Moore is saying this is going to destroy our way of life, our food supply, and our redwoods. And none of it is true. These are little nibblers. They're almost like the light brown eats almost nothing moth, not the light brown eats everything moth. Really. That's where they got the idea for this ad campaign.
And was there any input on the ad campaign, maybe the advocacy groups? Do you know, or is this just kind of...
None whatsoever. We're paying attention to pretty much every advocacy organization, environmental organization that's been involved in the LBAM program since its beginning, and we heard nothing about this ad campaign until it hit.
Okay. Let me ask a question just generally to the panel about the New Zealand model, or what's happened in New Zealand. What are they doing that we're not, other than the commercial that we used? But then on this issue, what does New Zealand, maybe you can explain that a bit, and then maybe what we've learned in California.
Dan Harper. Since they are under restrictions to import products into the United States, they spent a group there, researchers, is like the USDA equivalent there, spent considerable time and effort on understanding the biology of the pest and why LBAM and how to control LBAM to zero tolerance levels. And when the investigations began, they were using broad-spectrum pesticides, which destroyed not only light brown apple moth, but everything that ate it. And so when these were banned by mandate from the USDA, saying that we do not want to have these organophosphate pesticides on any fruit coming in the United States or New Zealand had to pull back and stop using those substances, those pesticides, which allowed them to see that the predators and the parasites came back within 2 years to be able to control the pest to almost 99% level plus. And they were able to export crops from point of export, not at the farm level, but once the boxes of apples arrive at the port, they're inspected, and then if there's an apple found in a crate, that crate is simply redirected to a country that doesn't have those restrictions. But there is no on-farm regulations. There are no on-farm quarantines like here. There are no, if you have LBAM on your farm, they don't care. I mean, it's up to the farmers, as has been mentioned here. It's the farmer's issue to keep it under control and meet these restrictions, and the government is actually helping them get their export products out by providing the inspections and providing the research that's necessary to control it. The model in New Zealand is that, and we found out by meeting with them personally, that it's a pest of almost no concern. They wanted to talk about it for a very short period of time. We wanted to consume them with questions because we had so many, but they started moving on to other insects that were much more threatening, like Roy mentioned this painted apple moth, which inhabited the western parts of Auckland, and they actually aerial sprayed Bacillus thuringiensis. And in retrospect, they got a citizens group and a government advocacy group, sort of an ombudsman, to look at the damage, and people got blisters on their skin, and there were problems with the aerial spray, but they controlled the painted apple moth, which is a serious pest. We don't want it here, and that's something that we need to watch out for. Light brown apple moth is not that pest, and they made it very clear that natural controls are in place, and that if you just monitor your fields carefully, which is a good integrated pest management strategy, you use thresholds to understand, okay, it's over a certain level in the traps, which is 35 moths per trap per month. In California, we've never seen anything over 4 moths per trap. first period. And that's when, at over 35 moths, that's when they actually start going out and looking for how to control it. They don't even spend time looking at their crops, they look at the traps. So they're using this very effective trapping program to give them indications about when treatments are necessary and they need to start looking for it. But actually, it's a background pest. It's not a serious concern. And you'll notice in the literature that the publication record for LBAM dropped off after they stopped using organophosphates and they figured out how to control it using natural methods because it wasn't of interest anymore. It wasn't a target anymore. It wasn't of too much concern. And Roy mentioned 99.9% of all shipments are able to leave New Zealand because they're able to control it to those levels.
And just to add, Roy Upton is their basic principle, their basic strategy is pure, unadulterated IPM, and it's one of the things that was completely negated by CDFA in this EIR as part of the no option program, as they specifically state that integrated pest management is not an appropriate strategy because it's not an eradication strategy. But that is the primary reason why New Zealand and a growing number of farms in Australia are able to ship all over the world without any LBAM whatsoever. And formal agricultural studies, and I wish Maldonado was here because I know he's a farmer and that's a strong interest. Formal studies in New Zealand show that those IPM practices are not only at worst cost neutral, but over the long term are actually cost benefit because they got greater control over all pests that allow them to use less pesticides and ship more. So at worst, the practices are cost neutral and long term save money. And this should be important to this committee itself.
Jim Carey here. I'll just make a general point to follow up on that, and that is I come back to this bipartisan policy center policy, science for policy. But the issue here is to develop policies that differentiate questions that involve scientific judgments from questions that involve policy judgments. And these get conflated basically here. It's, CDFA seems to have an endpoint, and then you cherry pick the science that is consistent with that endpoint. And I see, coming from the University of California along with Dan Harder, that the University of California here really has an important responsibility and role to play here. And I really wish that they would somehow step up beyond sort of CDFA appointing a couple on the technical advisory committee, or Dan and myself and a few others testifying. There's a major role here as a research arm of the state.
That's a good point. And let me just transition to the question of independent review, peer review. Are those both the same, or are those separate? And how does the UC play a role in that? Something that Roy mentioned as a recommendation, but I'm just trying to understand how we can, in the future, make these decisions and have some confidence that this is going to look at beyond the rush to, I think it's been mentioned, small window, we'll get it done, and here now it's 2015 window. And how do we move from that small window to?
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Jim Carey. So again, as I mentioned in my testimony, I came to California, or not to California, but UC Davis in 1980. And the policies and the technologies basically are exactly the same now as they were 29 years ago, and the same protocols and so forth. And that's why I come back to this paradigm. I see a long term and a short term. The longer term would be where University of California, in coordination with USDA and California Food and Ag, could take the lead, help take the lead in developing this new paradigm. We really need to rethink this whole thing. And that is, there's trends here that this eradication is just, get real. It doesn't work anymore, and or it never did really, but certainly you can only play this game of control in the name of eradication, as Roy mentioned. And in the shorter term, you can have panels. There's a brain trust there of colleagues at 2 different campuses. There must be several hundred ecologists and so forth, where you can have a pool of science, entomologists, and other, but it goes well beyond entomology, where it's multidisciplinary, right? And that could draw from where you have in questions like this and policy questions, where through the deans and so forth at these at UC, they could form an independent panel to really render judgment here. And this goes beyond sort of when you have a technical advisory committee, is what I call sort of should it be 2 drops or 1 drop of lure on the wick. These are technical questions. The deeper scientific questions have to do with the nature of the invasion and, of course, whether it can be eradicated and so forth. These are the deeper scientific questions, not the technical ones. So again, I think University of California really has an important role to play here.
Just one, yes.
Some interesting history, if you have just another moment.
We've got lots of time now, so you didn't show up. Feel free to fill in.
The Agricultural Research Service was primarily responsible for developing the concept of eradication in the first place. And there was the leadership in ARS in the person of Dr. Niblin invented the sterile insect technique as an eradicative tool and applied. He was the genius in picking the right bug, and they eradicated the screwworm fly because its biology and distribution in low population was perfect. And ARS became very heavily involved in seeing whether or not that could be extended to other insects, and the fruit flies were one of them, and appropriately so. And that's at the stage. That is the stage at which there became conflict of philosophy between the University of California and its entomological staff, primarily in Berkeley, and ARS, in that they kind of entrenched the two sides. There's a pro-eradication, and there's a eradication is unreasonable and shouldn't even be attempted. This is really a biological process that should proceed with natural controls and IPM. And that's the stage at which the University of California withdrew interest in participating in the research. There was early co-involvement in research on control and the biology of some of these pests. So there's as Dr. Carey says, that has to be reconsidered. I think California university system could very well reach out to ARS at this stage and renegotiate this attitude, because it's true. It's been demonstrated that eradication is it's not impossible, but it's rarely appropriate. It's certainly not appropriate here.
Sorry.
And that's the discussion. We continue to eradicate the same pests for 2 decades. And if we really were to eradicate, they would be on the list anymore. Correct. So then the paradigm shift then is one of control. In essence, is that the
Probably IPM control in agricultural settings more than any other, because as Dr. Chambers says, you have to approach it biologically. The more you try to kill and disrupt ecosystems, the less that ecosystem can stand on its own. And that's, I think, the bottom line paradigm shift that has to be recognized.
So it's not, we have midfly, for example, it's not at this point in the eradication program.
Darrell Shepard's. The case can be made that fruit flies in particular, because they're so easily moved at the larval stage in fruit, are reintroduced. And that's been an argument within the circle of advisors, even on the science advisory panel. So to what extent is eradication ever achieved? Well, it's not being achieved in that way.
Let me just comment, Jim Carey, the paradigm. This is, there's a new paradigm. It's not just adopting the IPM paradigm of traditional at the grower level. It's really this area-wide paradigm where it's IPM. That's why they call it that. So it would be like a consortium of growers that may get together and agree upon with their the people that buy their produce and so forth, that they have a low risk, put out enough traps, and if they don't catch anything, they have this protocols agreed upon for when there's no risk of movement of pest and so forth. And so that it's not just adopting the existing paradigm, it's really a merging of both the area-wide, the USDA, and the more academic-based IPM.
Tom Kelly. I'd like to just make a comment on the issue of public health and public trust. And the many of us in the advocacy area that were opposing this program from the point at which the spraying took place. And I should note that I worked for the California Department of Health Environmental Investigations branch prior to the beginning of the CDFA's program. And as a result, I knew many of the people in that branch who were tasked with supporting the CDFA in their public outreach campaign, and also with those who worked for the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, the state agency that wrote the study that indicated that there apparently was no link between the spraying and the health effects, at least none that they could establish. I just wanted to point out two things. One is that there was, in my opinion, a lot of disagreement among those state agencies, especially among the health department and the OEHA, as to their ability to be able to support the CDFA campaign, in part because the CDFA was not completely transparent with those two organizations. And an example of that was the study that OEHA did on the health effects of the spraying assumed a certain particular size of the spray, when in fact the CDFA realized that the particles were much smaller than they had indicated and were actually inhalable by the people who were sprayed. Yet that information wasn't passed on to these other agencies in time to be able to actually change that health report. Nevertheless, even though after it became apparent that that was the case, they never went back to it again to actually revise that report based on new evidence. The health department, over the many meetings at which the CDFA presented its case for the spraying, began to stop appearing at those events because, in my opinion, they felt that it was difficult to support the CDFA's contention that this was not harmful to public health. So I raise this not only because of the public confidence issue, but I also suggest that this has and continues to cause some difficulties within these state agencies, which should not be occurring. We should be able to trust those agencies, and we should be able to get good science from them.
Okay, just a closing question maybe to each of you. Given the manner of which we were drawn into court and then asked, I assume, to produce an EIR, we're now in the process, that EIR will be completed. Is it a foregone conclusion that we're going to continue on this path of eradication, any method that we pick in the EIR? So in other words, is there any method with the EIR that recognizes a simple control mechanism, or is this purely premised on the fact that this is on the eradication list and we have to continue on that path?
The EIR specifically has negated any control program whatsoever that didn't have eradication as its end goal. So the foregone conclusion of the EIR is that eradication is still the primary goal, and anything short of an eradication program would not be considered, was not considered in this EIR. It's very specific.
Gentlemen, thank you. And,
can I just, there's one thing that I could add, that I would love
absolutely can.
this committee to understand about the natural predation. To get back to how you asked about how New Zealand controls their crops. And we spoke with a gentleman from Port Research, USDA's counterpart in New Zealand, named Jim Walker. Jim Walker said that the primary way that they came to control LBAM within their agricultural systems was through the introduction of 7 parasitoids, direct parasitoids, and that's what gave them the greatest control over LBAM. Well, the last number that Nick Mills at the University of Berkeley has identified as native California parasitoids against LBAM is actually 13. So now we have at least twice the number of native parasitoids that actually prevent LBAM larvae from hatching than they do in New Zealand, where they have almost 100% control from parasitoids. And as Dan said, that's only parasitoids, not including spiders, flies, and everything else that eat LBAM. And this is very consistent with the scientific literature over the last 70 years, is that you have 90 to 99% natural mortality, death of LBAM in all its life stages, just biologically. This is the single most important, I think, issue that this committee could understand, is that it is nothing more than a background food chain insect, just like everything else that flits around our lights at night, but does nothing to anything anywhere of economic or biological significance. It's just part of the ecosystem, and really that's how we have to look at LBAM, and that its DNA is so close to our orange tortrix here that orange tortrix is also not a problem in agricultural systems. It is native, that you can almost not tell them apart with DNA fingerprinting. They're so close. And there's question as to whether or not they actually can distinguish them. This is, I think, an extremely important background understanding this committee should have about LBAM.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Okay, let's, if you could, go to panel 3. Okay, it's great.
Thank you. Senator Florez, thank you so much for holding this hearing. Thank you especially for the effort to incorporate these comments into an official comment back to CDFA. CCUF will, in addition to participating today, be submitting our comments. That will be more extensive. I'm not going to repeat many of the things that you've heard earlier today, unless I want to do it for emphasis. CCUF has been around since 1973. We're one of the largest organic certifiers in North America. We represent about 2,300 certified members of the trade association and 350 supporting members. Our primary concern right now is the fact that we have many farmers who are being quarantined because of this pest. We're frustrated about the delay in the release of the draft EIR. We're frustrated that they went the emergency route in the first place. We've got a website full of oppositions and support of some of CDFA's efforts too. I really wanted to emphasize the comment that David Chatfield made earlier, that farmers and the public are in a position to need to trust CDFA. And what's happened is we've lost that trust. As farmers, we have no choice but to trust the two enforcement agencies that oversee our ability to keep farming, CDFA and USDA. And the sad part about this whole issue is that we're losing trust on a daily basis. CCUF supported CDFA's initial LBAM eradication plan because it used approaches that were approved for organic production systems. CCUF does not now support aerial spraying. CCUF feels that there are other ground-based eradication methods that can be used. CCUF's members do not use synthetic toxic pesticides or heavy metals, both because they are prohibited in the National Organic Program and because of our philosophical opposition to the use of these products. CCUF does not oppose the use of passive pheromones or of sterile insect technology, although many CCUF members are involved with other organizations that you've already heard from and you will hear from who do oppose these techniques. We're really disappointed that CDFA has done such a poor job of reaching out to stakeholder communities with several seriously bad results, including avoiding the need to do an EIR in the first place by declaring an emergency, ignoring and treating anti-spray groups with disrespect, further fanning those groups' anger, and the public's negative reaction to the spraying and to CDFA staff efforts to explain themselves in their actions. Lawsuits and moratoriums in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties resulting in serious economic loss to many of our members and other farmers in those two counties. Poorly done quarantine inspections resulting in damaged crops, poor communication with farmers and with public, implying and in some cases saying outright that organic farmers were responsible for the spread of LBAM. And most recently, incorrectly and inappropriately advising an organic grower that he could use conventional pesticides on his field where LBAM were found. Many CSUF members feel that the department should develop a management or control plan as opposed to an eradication plan. They're still waiting for some evaluation from CDFA about whether the previous aerial spraying program was successful. We would like to see this evaluation, and that is one of the asks that we would like to present to you, is to request an evaluation of the aerial spray programs. Was it effective? We were at an industry meeting not too long ago where Mr. Robert Darrell of CDFA made a comment that the sterile insect technology release program was not in fact an eradication design, but it was a preventive release program, meaning that they will release the sterile insects in targeted areas where LBAM are high, such as the Carneros district and the Napa area, and they will hope that it works. We're really concerned that by their own admission, this sterile insect release technology program isn't an eradication program. The summary document on page S4 lists areas of concern and controversy, environmental concerns, and that's a pretty accurate statement of how many of us in CSUF feel. CSUF is concerned that many of the alternatives eliminated from further consideration, starting on page S5 and going through to page S6, are those that are routinely used in our organic system for all kinds of pest control, and they're used effectively. CSUF and many other organizations work diligently on all policy levels to encourage farmers to use management practices that are environmentally sound, including IPM, biological control, and similar biological approaches. It really troubles CSUF that CDFA has determined, for purposes of this draft EIR, that these methods are not useful against LBAM, when organic farmers know that they are effective at controlling all manner of pests. CDFA and many other organizations are involved right now in the second year of an ag vision process that seems to include some environmentally friendly farming practices. Yet CDFA's own day-to-day operational staff continue to do a poor job of working with all stakeholders and keep promoting farming practices that depend on an eradication concept that does not seem realistic or achievable. And that would be the second ask that we bring to this committee, is that you request CDFA to explain the supposed tension between the draft EIR, which eliminates all of those alternatives because they apparently don't work, in contrast to their ag vision process, which talks about all those touchy-feely correct approaches. That concludes my testimony, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. I will have questions. Let's go to the Robert Dolezal.
Hi, thank you, Senator Florez. This is Robert Dolezal from the California Association of Nurseries and Garden Centers. We will be submitting written comments to CDFA as part of their public process. I think that the committee's thanks are in order to CDFA for providing a very long and thorough, detailed, complete scientific assessment as required by the courts of Monterey and Santa Cruz of the likely impacts due and the alternatives for the light brown apple moth eradication program in California, including our nurseries. As you on the committee know, this serious pest has already caused severe financial and business hardship to California's nurseries and garden centers. It hurts small and large growers and retailers alike. We estimate the losses to date for nursery and floriculture due to the destructive invasive LBAM now exceed $10,550,000, including $1,600,000 in direct crop loss, indirect losses due to loss of market, and nearly $8,950,000 thus far in lost jobs that won't be coming back. A continuing cost that grows faster every month. Many smaller retailers are included in those who have suffered so much. They're just an LBAM or two away from shutting their doors. To lose the ability of residents of this state in Monterey, Santa Cruz, and other California communities to conveniently landscape their homes, buy flowers and trees to plant because of this destructive invasive pest exists in this state would be a real tragedy with long-lasting impacts. I'd like to respond to a few of the claims that were made in prior testimony. During a tour in July of regulators from the southern states, LBAM was found in every life stage by every regulator on raspberries in organic raspberry fields in the Salinas-Watsonville area. Those losses range from 20 to 50% of their crop. The remainder had to be juiced. It wasn't suitable for sale. And I was informed by the Ag Commissioner of Santa Cruz County that there were currently no organic caneberry growers left in that county. That may or may not be true, but it's what was represented as the viewpoint of the County Ag Commissioner. Further, South Carolina recently imposed regulation for LBAM above and beyond the federal order that makes it virtually impossible for nursery stock to be shipped to that state. Many other southern states who have combined in a special needs request to APHIS are watching closely what happens with regard to South Carolina. At the current time, nurseries are voluntarily ceasing their shipments, giving up their markets in that state, and considering whether a test case is necessary so that they can actually sue to have them follow the federal order. Continuing back to my prepared testimony, since this hearing is intended to assess the validity of the EIR draft, we report that the impacts on nurseries are estimated in the EIR at lower values for our segment than actually will be experienced. The EIR chose to use 2004 economic data from Carmen and Rodriguez that's out of date in light of Dr. Carmen's more recent 2007-8 economic report, which I will provide to this committee. Rather than nursery contributing $3 billion in farm gate sales, therefore, it has grown to $4 billion in 2007. Instead of $8 billion in total output, it contributed $13.3 billion to California's economy. And finally, rather than providing the 81,000 jobs indicated in the EIR, it now employs 217,500 Californians. So this is a significant business, and it's being significantly impacted. Because the base numbers are understated in the report, the extrapolated cost and impact to nursery are understated by at least 25%, and by, in some cases, as much as 60%. Therefore, the cost of LBAM to our community of growers and retailers is much higher than the EIR draft suggests. We'd also like to correct the assumption in the report that nursery operators would expand their use of pesticides to control this dangerous pest. The nursery community has worked closely with regulators, academics, and county agriculture to develop a set of best management practices, systems approaches that prevent the infestation of our nursery. This effort is nearly completed. Note that this BMP is contrary to the claims made earlier that IPM was not permitted nor desired. In fact, the BMP, which is required under every compliance agreement for every nursery, relies on prevention and inspection rather than treatment. We stopped LBAM at the nursery gates with trapping, perimeter bug zappers, removal of host plants from landscaping, and other measures. When an LBAM infestation is suspected in a nursery by its owners, their first choices are destruction of plant material, stripping of leaves, local spot treatment with horticultural oils, and natural biological controls or other safe methods that are preferred to widespread application of pesticides. We know how important every citizen believes it is that we must be good stewards of the land, our water, and public health, and take these responsibilities to protect our neighbors very seriously. Where our BMPs have been applied, the discovery rate of LBAM has dropped from frequent to a tiny fraction, very rarely. In some cases, less than once per year is a find made in our nursery following these BMP protocols. For these reasons, we believe that widespread adoption of the BMP will substantially reduce reliance on pesticide solutions in our nurseries, and both the program and no program alternatives may overstate the impacts of LBAM on nurseries in the end. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to try to answer them.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to the Farm Bureau.
Good morning, Senator Florez, and thank you for the opportunity this morning. My name is Chris Shering. I am with the California Farm Bureau. I am appearing on behalf of Cynthia Carey, our Director of Environmental Affairs. As you know, the Farm Bureau is the state's largest general service farm organization. We represent approximately 85,000 members across 56 counties in the state. Now, personally, I'm an attorney and I'm the Director of the Natural Resources and Environmental Division at the Farm Bureau, which is a division that includes 3 other attorneys that work for me on environmental issues that affect agriculture. CEQA, of course, and CEQA documents are a daily part of our lives in my shop. We are familiar with how they work. I have taken a look at this programmatic EIR for the light brown applesauce eradication program, and it appears to me to be a thorough and complete draft level review of the environmental effects of the alternate LBAM eradication methods. Now, I say that without being a technical expert on some of the issues that have been discussed today. I did hear a lot of the technical comments that were just made by some of the experts. What I did not hear were a whole lot of concerns expressed with respect to process or the contents of the EIR procedural or legally sufficient basis. It's worth noting that the public process here has been and will continue to be extensive. The California Department of Food and Agriculture, as you know, has initiated a 60-day public review period for this draft programmatic EIR. That's an initial 15 days beyond the normally applicable 45-day review period. Certainly some allowance there for additional review of what is already an extensive document. And that's in addition to the 7 public hearings to obtain public comment, which are currently underway. So it seems that there is certainly the required legal process associated with this EIR, and we certainly encourage anybody in this room or elsewhere to engage in that. That's what a draft programmatic EIR is for. It's a document to comment on. It's a document that the agency responds to. All of the concerns that have been voiced so far are well placed and should be a part of that final comment procedure. Now, the Farm Bureau is completely aware of the concerns surrounding the handling of the LBAM eradication. Many of these concerns are philosophical. We represent both organic and conventional growers and have been in close contact with them on this issue for a couple of years now. We recently had a meeting with federal and state regulators seeking resolution on how to help our members cope in the quarantined areas with the extra burden of inspection and compliance that they're struggling under. Just an anecdote, one of our organic members in Santa Cruz County, who sells locally to farmers markets, asked that we urge the state to reinstate ground-based eradication controls using pheromones to help those growers who are facing increased LBAM populations. She has to comply with the LBAM inspection and compliance, even though she sells only at farmers markets within the quarantine area. Now, the increased spread is now 15 counties, as I understand it, as of today, and growers' concerns are certainly becoming widespread, especially as we enter the harvest season. We at Farm Bureau believe that the LBAM can be eradicated, and we support the various methods outlined in CDFA's LBAM programmatic EIR. This programmatic EIR, I think, was clear that doing nothing is not an option. The no program alternative in this document, which would expand quarantine, detection, and inspection activities without any area-wide biological or chemical controls by USDA or CDFA, is the option that actually has the most potentially significant environmental impact compared to all the other methods. And in that vein, I'd like to bring to your attention a recent July 14th Sacramento Bee article, which you may already be familiar with, Senator Florez. The name of this article is "The Capital is Called the Delta's top pesticide source, and this was in relation, of course, to the pyrethroids in the Delta. In this article, I can certainly leave a copy with you if you're interested. It discusses the recent UC Berkeley research that shows that retail pesticides used on lawns and commercial properties in the Sacramento area may be the largest source of pyrethroids in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Now, since the LBAM threatens a large number of endangered agronomic and ornamental plants, it is clear that expecting growers and landowners to deal with this issue on their own terms with no governmental eradication assistance will only lead to the increased use of more pyrethroids and even more noxious pesticides, I suppose, into our water system as compared to sterile moths and pheromones. Now, I've heard that disputed here, but it seems to me a bit of logic. We completely support consumer education and prevention as the best control for invasive species. But education in this case can't be the only tool. We're probably going to support the approval of this programmatic environmental impact report with the methods detailed therein after we've taken a look at the additional public comments that come in. And we believe that the strategies outlined are safe and effective. Thank you for your time and attention.
Great. Let me start at your end. How would you probably approve something you haven't seen? In other words, the decision, how does the Farm Bureau move in a direction that says we would probably approve if you haven't understood the decision of the Secretary? EIR. So what exactly
based upon our understanding of the program and what we've read in the document and what I've heard today, I would imagine that we would probably, I use the word probably for a reason, Senator Florez.
Right, that's what I'm asking. Why would you use the word probably?
Well, if there were any evidence that was brought out as part of this hearing or any other element of the public process that caused us to believe either that the risks were overstated, as some have said today, or that the treatment measures were unnecessary, Farm Bureau is an open-minded organization, and we would certainly entertain any doubts as to the program if we think they're well-founded. So I advise you to use the word probably in that case, sir.
Okay. And in terms of the, what you call the philosophical issues with the EIR, is that then make the EIR, is the EIR not supposed to take in large philosophical issues in terms of paradigms and shifts and the distinction between eradication and control?
No, sir, I don't believe that that is the case. I believe that EIR is a CEQA document. It assesses environmental impacts. The larger policy questions, which are the philosophical questions, would be an element of whatever approval action is actually before CDFA, which in this case would be approval of some sort of program, either this one or a modified version of this one or some other program entirely. But the philosophical, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead.
I would say that the philosophical debate over the use of pesticides, and I'm familiar with that, and as I said, we represent organic growers, is not something that factors into the CEQA analysis in legal terms, as a legal matter.
And in terms of the, you said you are on the legal side and have looked at the EIRs in the past. Is that the role of the lawyer? Is this EIR sufficient in terms of health effects, in terms of each probable or discussed method of eradication? Does it include
in the human health section?
Yeah.
I can certainly not opine on that because I am not a doctor, technical expert, epidemiologist, any of those sorts of things. So I can't tell you the answer to that. Ultimately, that is, well, in the first instance, that's up to CDFA to evaluate when they close their process. And in the second instance, if this were to proceed to litigation, that would be up to the court to decide.
Yeah.
I believe there's a fair amount of deference accorded to an agency in selecting among the opinions of competing experts when it certifies a final document. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just wondering, in terms of the EIRs that you've looked at, does it conform with past EIRs that actually ask for the additional health effects of each method proposed?
Yes, sir. Assessing the effects on the human environment is a requirement of an EIR. This one in particular goes quite some distance in that regard, where you might have a much lesser discussion of health impacts in an front and center is one of the front and center questions is what's the likely effects to human health? So I would say, this is a completely, obviously this is a program that involves, among other things, the use of some types of pesticides, so they knew they had to go there, and they did. You wouldn't find that in an EIR for a different type of project necessarily.
Okay. Let me move on to the nurseries and garden centers. Your view of this EIR process is positive? I mean, do you like the way, other than some of the incorrect?
Well, let me state philosophically that the nurseries like to ship clean plants, free of diseases, free of pests, to people and have them grow and be beautiful in their yards, or grow into the crops that we love so much, the nut trees and peach trees and so on. And anything that stands in the way of our ability to do that is, of course, an impediment. We have trade issues that have already reared their head. We're being restricted from shipment to Canada, to Mexico, and now to individual states on the basis of LBAM, being in an LBAM quarantine with or without the pest being present on the nursery stock. And so those issues are significant economic disincentives from our viewpoint. We suffer real pain and frustration from that. On a more broad sense, we're good members of the community and we have no desire to inflict pesticide loads, air pollution, dust, noise, or anything else on our neighbors. It's not something that is built into this. Contrary is we're a green industry. We produce plants that sequester carbon and so on. So as I look at this situation, the California Department of Food and Agriculture a court demand was made on them to produce the CIR. The CIR would likely have been produced under any circumstances given all the issues that had taken place, legislation here in the Capitol that was presented during the last session, this session, and so on. And so I think that the EIR is an appropriate response mechanism under CEQA to be able to deal with the issues that are involved here. From nursery's viewpoint, our objective is to try to get to business solutions that work for the environment, work for our members, and accomplish the objective, which in this case is limiting of pests. As a rebuttal to somebody's prior comment about this pest long being established in California in virtually every county. There are tracking programs that are out every single county. They've been going on since before this pest arrived and since. The interesting thing about the light brown apple moth that have been trapped in those traps is that they come from 15 counties with very thin trapping on the outer edges of the perimeter and very thick trapping up to 100 individuals per trap in San Francisco and the East Bay. And so you expect under those circumstances that is a population and it is expanding. More importantly, there's no genetic diversity when the DNA is analyzed. They're all essentially clones of the same animal. So they come from one strain. There's only been one insect found in all this trapping in which the DNA is different. That is not representative of a long-established population.